I'm Sarah Getzinger, Shop Local Raleigh. So thank you guys for coming out for Tech Tuesday today. We are joined by Stacey Sprenz of Stacey Sprenz Photography. Stacey takes some incredible product photos and food and beverage photography as well. And she's going to share some tips and tricks on how we can do some better photography in-house. So Stacey, I will let you take it from here.
Okay, awesome. All right, there we go. Can everybody see that? The first slide?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, perfect. Great. Thank you, guys. All right, well, let me tell you a little bit about me, because it's like, okay, what does this woman do? Why is she talking about this? So I actually am a self-taught photographer. I say self-taught, however, my sister and my now husband, who was my boyfriend in high school, they took photography classes, and I ended up kind of learning by osmosis, or just actually asking a lot of questions. And then my sister and I, she got my grandmother's old Minolta, good old film camera. I can still, when I say film camera, hear the sound of a film camera. And we played with that a lot. And we were a family that took a lot of photos, and, you know, pretty much captured every family event in photos. And then as I aged and had children and discovered nature and all this, I would take my camera everywhere with me. And then I worked in mental health education and special ed within the Wake County Public Schools, and decided to step back from that and start my own photography business. And I focus on food, beverage, hospitality, and agriculture. However, as you will see today from some of the examples that I'm showing you of some of my work that I have done, I definitely foray outside that when it is appropriate, or when I'm asked to, or it's something that I might have a connection to. So the photos that you'll see today are the photos that I have taken, and I'm going to give you a lot of examples of things. And as I go through, if you guys have any questions, please, interrupt me. This is not, I don't like to talk at people. I like to make sure that they have basically got everything that they need to, ask questions and get clarifying information. So we will get started. So basically today we're going to talk about taking better photos, specifically with your smartphone. A lot of photographers that do professional photography, you say smartphone photography and they kind of roll their eyes. I am not one of those people. I think for business owners especially, that is a wonderful tool that you have in your hand when you're holding your smartphone. You can run your entire business pretty much on that. And I think that it has a lot of value when it comes to photos. There is some challenges also when it comes to photos, because smartphones don't have the same sensors or sensitivity or basically technology quite yet that a digital single lens release camera or a digital point and shoot have. But that does not mean that it's not a great tool to take photos for your business. We're going to talk about some tips and tricks to be able to basically kind of utilize it and get the most out of it. And then we're going to talk a little bit about content strategy, and we're going to kind of all mesh that together. So if you have any questions as we go, or if you want me to kind of focus in on specifically what your business is and what, how this applies to your business, definitely, stop me, ask me, because I want you to get the most out of this. I've been teaching food photography and photography classes for, I guess, since about 2015 now. And I basically try to tailor it to whatever group I'm speaking to. So hopefully this will land very good with you guys. Let's see here. All right, so if you want to, screenshot this or whatever, this is a way to get up with me later if you have questions that may be specific to something that you had a question about your business, or about your smartphone or your camera, or anything specific. You can get up with me. The teaching does not stop when the class is over. I love for people to reach out and ask me questions later. So feel free to contact me any of those ways. All right, so why take photos? Why take photos of what's going on in your business? Well, can anybody, when you look at this photo, this is DeKine's Cava in Durham, which is where I live. Can anybody tell me what is kind of being communicated here? What do you see or feel, or what do you feel the message is when you look at this photo? And there are no wrong answers.
Open for business.
Yeah, open for business. Anybody else?
A space for gathering with friends.
Yes, a space for gathering. That's a big one. That was kind of our goal of this whole photo shoot was, they wanted people to come to an alcohol and spirit-free place to be able to, hang out. It kind of looks like a bar. It has the feel of a bar, but there is something different about it, but it's still a place for gathering. We're also communicating a little bit of the aesthetic too. It has kind of a tropical vibe. With the color palette and all of the, the sunshine streaming in with the garage doors open and the flowers and the plants. And so, there's a lot going on in that photo, but there's also a lot being communicated. And I think it's kind of interesting what, that whole idea of a photo is worth 1,000 words. Sometimes it's worth way more than that, especially when it comes to your business. So as we kind of go through some of the examples of the things that I'm going to share with you today, I want you to think about what those photos are communicating to you and how you can communicate your business, maybe your mission, brand recognition, those kinds of things through the images that you take to put out there in social media or website or marketing materials. I do think especially your smartphone has a really good application when it comes to social media and it comes to catching things in the moment. I do believe that you should have some sort of professional photography for your business. And that usually, I tell people, if you do it for nothing else, do it for your website or for your marketing materials so that you have, the sharpest images, well-lit images, and really, kind of dialed in for your brand. And then, your smartphones can help, put everything else kind of together for an overall strategy for marketing. So photos can help you do several things. They can help you tell a story. They can develop a brand identity. They can pull back the curtain and let customers or followers, potential customers see your process, your creations, your, story, and they can show your culture and they can start a following. They can build community. And that I think is really important. A lot of people, when we talk about pulling back the curtain, they're like, oh, I don't want to do that, or I don't know how to do that. Well, pulling back the curtain, first of all, is whatever you are most comfortable with. A lot of businesses have proprietary things. You don't want to put that out there, but you can kind of get creative in ways to pull back that curtain. And I think pulling back the curtain on your business and letting your customers kind of see processes and see kind of what you're doing behind the scenes and see the culture of your workplace is a really important way to build credibility and to build brand loyalty as well. So I think that's really huge. And also building community. A lot of businesses are doing things out in the community. I'm often asked to come and photograph events that are collaborations. And I think that it's really important to capture those things also with your own phone or your own, camera to be able to have as kind of a history of your business and a history of the collaborative community building that you may be doing. All right, what is going on here? There we go. All right, so when we talk about brand identity, this is a shoot that I did years ago, right when AC Hotels in North Hills opened. I was working with a PR and marketing firm. And so when we talk about brand identity, is there anything that you kind of feel identifies this brand in these photos? Any kind of feeling you're getting or something that you're seeing that's a recurring theme? And again, there's no wrong answers. I just want to get you guys to kind of think about what you're seeing in a photo so that when you do this for your own business, you can kind of be intentional about it.
It feels professional.
Yes, yes. And specifically, let's dial that in a little bit more. What kind of professionals are you seeing in these photos?
Like a traveling business professional.
Yes, like a traveling business professional, young professionals. Do you notice how all of them are kind of, they kind of have those muted color tones and almost have a little bit of a matte filter to them? You guys noticing that as well? So that is part of their brand identity. They don't want it to be super bright colors and kind of in your face. They want their brand to be kind of relaxed and, professional, but like very almost zen and kind of like calming, because they're a hotel, and they're a hotel that is throughout many cities, and they're in kind of, a area of Raleigh that is known as kind of a, entertainment, dining, financial area. And they want to be kind of this, if you will, nice little place where people can, as they're traveling, find comfort. You'll also see that their brand, AC Hotels Marriott, is prevalent in the photo of the gentleman walking with his suitcase in front of the building, but also the little card on the table that you see in both of those photos. That little card also, if that photo was bigger, you would see it. It has the AC Hotel. So there's also that idea of the brand recurring through the photos. And you can do this very easily a couple of ways. One, to have, your signage or your brand logo somewhere in the photo. But we're going to talk a little bit later about the editing process. And in editing, you can add that later to the photo so that that photo is a branded photo for your business. So we'll talk a little bit about that. All right, telling your story. So this is Firsthand Foods, and they are an aggregator. They work with North Carolina farmers to source pasture-raised, Animal Welfare Alliance certified beef, pork, and lamb. And I've been working with them for about 8 years now. I started off as a brand ambassador and then started doing photos and recipe development and blog posts for them. And, when you tell your story through photos, you have to think about your history. You have to think about all the pieces and parts of your business. And you have to kind of think about, not leaving something hidden. And that was one of the things that I've helped them do over 8 years was they came to me and said, we want to basically visually tell the story of our business. A lot of people, when we're asking them, they don't understand what our brand is. And they think we're a farm. And I said, as your brand ambassador who goes out to places and talks to people, yes, they do. They think that you guys are farm owners and these are all of your animals. And they said, one of the things that we really want to do is we want to put the focus on the farmers, the people who, if we didn't work with them, this business that we have would not be possible. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's a great way to do that. What do you want to do? And they said, we want you to come with us. And we've been taking some photos too. So to help us kind of synthesize this when we go and visit these farms. So as you'll see, there's a wonderful portrait of the owners that I took. And I think that that's really important to have somewhere in your social media. You can do it as an introduction. Hey, this is, who I am. This is me and my team behind this business. I think it's also a really, really great thing too, to have that credibility that like, wow, they are, smiling and they look fun and approachable. And I think that that goes a long way to build brand loyalty. Then they also have these wonderful photos of like the farm, this picture of one of the actual farms where you kind of see the blue sky and it's out, it's actually near it's a little north of Durham near the Virginia border. It was a beautiful day and it kind of says farm and it says, and the farm name is there too. So people are like, oh, wow, they must work with other farms. So there's things that you're communicating through these photos as you're using them either on your website or in social media or your marketing materials. They also want to show people that, it's a delicious product. So the corner of the roast beef down there in the corner, that's something that I shot for them. That's something that, is really easy for people to do with a smartphone too, is that if you're using the product or if you have customers or staff members that are using a product that you sell, it's really easy to get those photos as that product is being used to be able to use those as a way to market. So this kind of tells their whole story of them, the farmers they work with. There's the agricultural aspect, there's the gathering around food aspect, the cooking aspect, and then, the delicious, meals and recipes aspect. So this helps to tell their whole story visually. And don't forget that, posts with a photo get like, I think the average a couple of years ago was 650% more engagement on a post with a good photo than a post with no photo, or with a photo that is, you know, very text heavy, like a graphic that's very text heavy, that's not an image per se. The other thing too is photos will get people to read what you want to tell them. That's a big one, and that goes throughout magazines, that goes throughout social media, and that also goes throughout anything that's on the web. So, you know, when you have that eye-catching photo, people zone in on that and they're like, oh, what is this? And they're communicated to through that photo, but then they want more information. So they're going to read more about what is this photo, what is this business, and it just kind of expands from there. Any questions so far? Okay. Now we're going to talk about pulling back the curtain on your culture and your staff. This, we're going to step out of the hospitality and food realm for a minute. This I did for a company called Braven that is outside the Triangle, kind of, I think, just a little bit beyond the Nightdale area. And they actually take plastics, and a lot of that plastic is within the food world. So that's why this kind of came across my desk. They take plastics and they distill it back down into oil and fuel that can be used and resold back to refineries. So they wanted to do a handbook that was an HR handbook. And so they said, you know, we want you to come and we want you to capture the culture, the work culture that we have. And we have kind of two work cultures. We have, you know, that, you know, more engineer, you know, business side. And then we have the people that are doing the actual really hard work of, you know, engineering the things that we're using to break down the plastics, the people who are actually like making sure the plastic gets sorted and churned up and put into the hopper. And so what do you guys see in these photos that tells you about this work culture? Again, no wrong answers.
It seems collaborative.
Yes. And what was, somebody else said something?
Oh, I said the same thing. I said the team.
Oh, okay. Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of like, you know, they look like they'd be a fun place to work. Like people are, you know, team oriented. There's groups of people working on one thing together. What else do you notice?
I see
Almost
safety features like
Yes.
boots and eyeglasses and ear
Yes.
protection kind of stuff. So
Thank you. That was a huge piece of this shoot. And so when we think about like taking those photos at our own place of business as an owner, you do want to focus in when you are telling people about your business and you're pulling back the curtain, you want to focus in on like what is in the frame, like make sure that it looks good. You know, anything outside the frame is okay to push those things outside the frame that don't really say what you want to say, but making sure that like employees are, you know, dressed appropriately, that, you know, processes are followed. You know, a lot of times in the food world, I am always, when I'm doing a shoot, I'm like, hey, you know, should you guys be wearing gloves or should the hair be back? We want people to understand that like, although we want you to look good, and to have this be like a fun photo, we also want to make sure that we're not communicating that this is how you do things on a daily basis, that you're being safe and that you're following, you know, industry guidelines and things like that. You'll also notice that in pretty much, I think, every photo, people are smiling. And one of the things that I will say about this company, having worked with them on this day, I did not have to ask anyone to smile. They truly love what they do, each person that I encountered. And the smiles were genuine, and you can tell they have a really good camaraderie, and that will come through in the photo. These were not forced smiles. These were not forced moments. These were basically moments where we kind of just said, okay, what does it look like when? And so that's a great way to show, you know, what you do, maybe some of the equipment you work with, maybe some of the processes you work with, but also what is the culture? People who see a culture like this either want to be a part of it, if that's what you're trying to communicate, that you're, you know, hiring. And I know right now hiring is a big deal with a lot of people. because it's a tough market out there to keep people and to find people. And also what, I want to know what this company does, because like this is a company I can get behind as a consumer. So that's also a really important thing when you're, languaging that through the photo to potential customers is, this looks like a good place that, they treat their employees well, people are having a fun time, and the next piece of that is they probably have good customer service. So just think about, like, as you're taking these photos, and I think also a very good way to do this is as you're looking at other people's photos on their website and their marketing material on social media, what are you feeling? What are you seeing? What are you feeling like is being communicated to you? Because I think that's a really important kind of starting point. What are you seeing that doesn't feel right? And you're like, wow, I wouldn't do it that way because that feels like it's communicating something to me that is not a positive. Maybe it's a negative or it's a very neutral thing. So does that make sense to everybody? Thumbs up. Any questions for anybody so far? Okay. So now we've talked a little bit about the why and the, communicating and the, strategizing. So now let's kind of dial it in and talk about smartphone photography. Before we start on this, how many of you are using your phone or using maybe a point and shoot camera that you have for the business to take photos already? And if this is something that you're doing, or maybe you want to do, what are your biggest challenges? I think this will kind of help us be able to, give you some solutions. Anybody have any challenges, or maybe you want to start doing it, but you're like, oh, I see that this is going to be something else I gotta handle, and I'm not really sure how to do this.
I always struggle with lighting. I feel like my shadow is always in all of my pictures.
Exactly. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about that, and I would say lighting, and that's the reason it's #1 on the list. Lighting with a smartphone is the hardest piece. And one of the things that I will tell you is, and this goes to whether you have Android or Apple. I'm an Apple person. Let me be super honest with you that, like, I have threatened so many times to go to Android. My sister lives in New Jersey and she is a photographer as well. She does families and weddings and things like that. And she happens to have an Android, and I think it takes remarkable photos. But I just can't give up my Apple phone. So Apple keeps getting better. And I think part of it is we can't solely rely on the latest and greatest phone that has a good camera. We also need to rely on some things, some tips, some tools, some other tools that will help us take really good photos of whatever it is we want to take photos of. So lighting, definitely #1. Does anybody have any other challenges that they feel? Because it might not be something on this list, and we can definitely address it if we have time.
Hi, this is Maggie Bailey. I'm sorry I'm late. I just joined, but my biggest thing is creating interest in the movement and the human element. I work with a nonprofit, and at our events, we're doing, giving away trees and tree planting and rain barrel workshop. And I think the hardest one that I have to take good pictures for posting is the tree giveaways.
Okay.
Because the trees they're small and they get lost, especially in the winter when I'm doing them, because they're just a stick.
Yes. That stick has so much potential, but it's hard to show that. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Well, when we get to the movement part, we're gonna directly address that, because I have a few ideas. My mind tends to, like, I often say I wish I could plug people into my mind so they could kind of see what I'm thinking, although it would probably be a scary place for some of you. A lot of times we try to show a really big picture when what we need to do is dial it into something that is a tighter framed photo that has much more emotional impact. So we're gonna put a pin in that, and when we get to creating interest, we're going to talk about that. Okay. Anybody
Super.
else have anything that whether it's on this list or not on this list, that is a challenge for them? Okay, well, we will go on, and if you think of something, please interrupt me, and we can absolutely address it. We've got plenty of time to do that. So lighting, you always need more. Always, always, always need more. If you think you have enough lighting, add a little bit more. And the nice thing about digital photos and having a phone is that if it's too much, then there are ways to correct that, and you can dial it down in editing, or you can take it away. You know, this isn't film, so basically we get to say, oh, that didn't work, and delete it, or, you know, look at it for a minute and then try it again a couple of different times. Part of it too is knowing what your device is, you know, knowing the limitations of your device, knowing what your device is really good at, and then practicing. Part of that is the more you do this, the more return on that investment that you're going to get, because you're going to be able to dial it in and know, oh, this is how we want to approach these things. And, you know I'm talking to a lot of you as owners of the businesses. I also think it's really important, and I often tell, you know, my restaurant clients, I tell my product clients this: if you have people that are working for you that you trust with giving you some content, I think that's a really important thing, not to have this be one more thing as a business owner that you have got to be solely responsible for, and feels like, oh my gosh, when am I going to find the time to manage, you know, photos that I'm taking for my business. I am also a small business, and I try to post as often as I can, and to, you know, market myself and build a following and build community. But I do know that that can often be very difficult, and I am a business of one, so I know what that feels like. But if you have, and especially like younger folks that work for you, or folks that are very technologically savvy, I think those are the people that, you know, as you feel, you know, this grows within your company, you know, those are the people to pull in and be like, hey, you know, I have this, you know, Dropbox, and as you take photos as you're working, would you load those into this Dropbox for me so that I can look through those and figure out which ones, you know, might be good for us to use to market in social media or whatever. So keep that in mind as well as we go through this. So lighting, composition, the rule of thirds, and leading lines. Drawing interest is what composition is all a part of. And composition also has to do with, like, how close do I get to my subject? Where do I put my subject in the frame? How do I frame it? Do I do portrait? Do I do landscape oriented? Do I do a square and keep everything in my Instagram a square? You know, these are kind of questions you need to ask yourself before you go forward with, you know, creating a content strategy, and then, you know, developing content for that strategy. Creating interest. That's often done through movement, and movement has to do with how our eye moves through an image. And I'm going to show you examples of all of this, and kind of ask you guys what you think you're seeing in these photos as far as these different things. And then also adding a human element. Often we do, we have active and we have passive photos, and, you know, passive photos are fine. Passive photos are a lot of what I do, but I find sometimes when I add that human element, or I add actual humans doing things that are motion into that, that just kind of changes the engagement, and it changes what I'm communicating through that photo. And then finally, we're going to talk a little bit about editing. And I know that editing is another, shall we say, task within taking photos, taking good photos for your business that you will need to look at. But what I say to people is find an app for editing, or a way to edit, and get familiar with it. I can send you all kinds of wonderful things about this app or that app, or Google, you know, the best photo editing apps for smartphones, and there will be, you know, lists dating back years that are still relevant. I think the best thing to do is find one, how much do you want to, invest in it? Do you want a free app? Do you want an app that costs a couple of bucks? Do you want an app that's a subscription? Is there something you're already using that might have an app for this? And then get familiar with it. Find out if there are tutorials within the company website. Find out, if they have like some online resources, and know that app so that it becomes something that you can do quickly and efficiently to be able to get that photo the way you want it to go out into the world and bring you more business. Keep moving my mouse here. Okay, so really quickly, we're going to talk about some things within photography that make a huge difference. And some people are like, well, why do you do this in a smartphone thing? Because a smartphone, like, it figures all of this out for us. It does. But I think it's really important to kind of take a step back and be like, well, what is it doing? You need to understand photography just a little bit in order to then understand what the phone is doing, and then circumvent or, go around a challenge, or, make an image that is best suited for this type of device. So this top photo is kind of showing you light on a spectrum of color. And on the right-hand side, you have cool. You have a very blue, kind of cool light. Looking at that might even evoke an emotion of like cold and, maybe, cold, hard surfaces and coldness or shade. And then as you go kind of to the middle of that, you see right around 6,000, you see like what we call true white light, or completely white balanced light. And then as you go back over to the left, you're seeing that it basically goes to a really warm light, like a light that almost feels like one of those old sauna lights that people used to put in the bathrooms to keep the bathroom warm. And that is a really warm, that should evoke a feeling of heat or warmth, or, kind of homey, thinking about like color palette of like, oranges, yellows, things that are really homey, like wood cutting boards versus on that side versus, a quartz white countertop on the other side. Just thinking about how those things kind of evoke emotion, and they also communicate through a photo. So often I tell people, we're going for that middle area so that all of our colors are balanced, but it's also okay when you edit, or if you're able to move around to photograph something, to go one way or the other to kind of evoke an emotion or a feeling. So it's important to know. And I'll talk a lot about LED lights later when I talk about equipment. LED lights tend to be kind of between that 6,000 and 7,000 range, right in there. Even some can be honestly between 5,000 and 7,000. So LED lights are really good for additional lighting because they're right in that kind of middle range where they don't go too cool and they don't go too warm. If you have fluorescent lights, or if you have tungsten, like the filament lights, those are generally on that warmer side. So if you're seeing when you're taking photos inside and you have those warmer lights, that everything looks really kind of cream colored and kind of warm and weird, that's why those lights tend to give off that type of light. So you may need to kind of use a different light to get a better color balance. You can also do that in post editing, and we'll talk about that in a minute.
And I have a question.
Yes, go ahead,
Maggie. And these 1,000 to however high it goes, these are lumens, or what unit?
They're Kelvins.
Kelvins.
So yeah, so it goes, and you will see, like, if you pick up light bulbs, like for a lamp or something, a lot of times now they're putting the K value on there. I see that all the time. I tend to, even for like the lighting in my home, like to be between like, 5,000 and 7,000 for like my overhead lighting. But then, maybe I want a little bit warmer lighting, like around 4,000 for like a lamp. So you will see that whether you're using LED or compact fluorescent, or, the old filament bulbs, you'll see that on there. And keeping in mind that a lamp is a really good, additional lighting that you can use. So, and we'll talk about that, like what are some good things that you can use that maybe, you know, are very budget friendly. I've already got this lamp that I could, you know, use as extra lighting. So, you know, and you were talking about like being outdoors and doing outdoor events. You know, when we think about being outside, you are looking at, you know, like when we talk about golden hour, well, where would golden hour be? It would be down there, you know, 2000, 3000, that like late
Right.
afternoon, early
Mhm.
evening sun, you know, it makes everything warm, and it like gives this feeling of like warmth and love and wonderfulness.
Mhm.
And, you know, so our morning light tends to be kind of a little bit on the other side. And if you're under a shaded tree or an overhang, not only are you getting like the color that the side of the building would be, you know, as part of your overall light, you're definitely going to be on that, you know, 8,000 to 9,000 and maybe even more blue in a shaded area. And a good way to see this is to take a piece of paper or a piece of, you know, white foam board, and, you know, move it around and notice what the light is that you're seeing. If you know that that's a true white and you put it underneath something and you're like, wow, that looks kind of bluish green, you'll know that that's a cooler light versus putting
Mhm.
it near a light source, and you can see that it's, you know, more of a warm source. Being outside in direct sunlight is really difficult, especially for our smartphones, because of the shadowing, you know, especially faces. So we'll talk about when we get kind of more in depth as far as like subject versus where your light source is. That's when you're going to need to kind of think about, where does your light source come from? You know, you can see it in my glasses. I've got a light right in front of me because I've got side light, a window right here, and I've got nothing on this side. So in order to be well lit so you guys can see me, you know, I put this light here. If I was backlit, I would need to probably turn to where I either had side light or, you know, because backlit means that whatever is here is going to have shadow, unless you reflect or put another light. And we'll talk about that in a minute.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. Any other questions? So aperture. Okay, so how many of us got the smartphone, the Apple iPhone when it came out and we had portrait mode? Oh my gosh, portrait mode. But then we're like, well, wait, it's only catching a piece, like the very front label of something I'm trying to take a photo of, and then it blurs the bottle and it blurs everything else. I've been there, done that too. So what's happening is the iPhone is simulating like an f4 in this little scale here. And basically what that is that's how wide or how narrow your aperture is. And your aperture has a lot to do with how much light gets in. So it will determine how sharp things are that are closer to you versus how sharp things are that are further from you. And you can see that a very narrow aperture, like an f32, that would be good for like a landscape photo or an overall photo of something that you want all of it to be as much in focus as you can get it. And then you go down to like f4, f2, and that's more of the like headshot portrait. You know, I have something closer to me and I want to give an overall feel of everything that is behind it so that it doesn't look like it's just hanging out in space. And I'll show you some examples of that. But also, like, I don't want people to focus on that. I want them to focus on that thing that's in the foreground. So that's what, like, I dial in my camera on manual mode to get that effect. Basically, there's different options on, you know, your smartphone and in editing. You know, you can do editing where you say, hey, I want everything right here to be really sharp, and I'm going to blur everything behind it. And that basically simulates some of that wider aperture down there at f4 and f2. Does that make sense to everybody? And if you have a camera that you have, you know, that you're using, that you have a manual option or an aperture option, that might be a fun thing to play around with so that you can kind of figure out, you know, you have a lot more light coming in if that's open big, right? So that aperture is great for when you're in lower light. But if you're down at f22 or f32 and you try to take a photo inside, you're going to need a flash, you're going to need extra light because that aperture is only open a little bit. Yes, Sarah.
Do you know if on iPhones there's a way to, like, portrait mode sometimes is like just way too intense versus the normal camera, if there's like any in
Yes.
between?
So here's what I will show you. So when you go into your camera, okay, so you're in your camera, if you go up to this little drop down right there, it's going to give you a bunch of stuff down here at the bottom. It's going to, you know, say flash. It's going to ask you, here is going to be your exposure. And you can change some things down in here for your exposure. You can do a timer. You can do different things. You can do a different orientation. And so
Are you
as
showing us something different on your screen? Because I still see only.
so if you have an iPhone and you bring up your camera and
Yeah,
you
yeah.
go down or you go up to the little V at the
Mhm.
top that's yellow and you hit that, that is going to give you underneath the frame a bunch of different options to use. And you can often hit those options and get like an option to do like different exposure values, those types of things. So if you go into portrait and you do that, it will give you some different options to use in there. So that little caret at the top is what gives you more, and it gives you an F value. So do you see that like script F? So go into portrait and then go to that little caret that's at the top. That's mine is yellow, and it will give you that menu. And there's like a flash symbol. There's a plus minus, which is your exposure. There's a timer. And then over at the far right is the F that looks like a script F. That is your aperture.
That's incredible. Thank you.
You are very welcome. So yeah, don't be afraid. Like, your phone is wonderful and it makes all kinds of wonderful, wonderful like averages. And it a lot of times we'll dial it in and you'll be like, wow, I can't believe I took that with my phone. But then sometimes those averages don't work. And so it's okay to get in there and kind of play around with like more of a manual way of using that. Does everybody kind of, and I'm specifically addressing iPhone. I do know that the Android has that. That's not the phone that I use. So unfortunately, but again, go Google is a wonderful resource for photography. So go in there and just Google like Android, how do I change the f-stop? And I bet you it will be a pretty quick and simple way to do that. Does that make sense to everybody? All right. So you've all heard about, I'm sure if you have any photography like exposure, the three-legged stool, I call it the trifecta of ISO, shutter speed, and aperture. All of these things are interconnected, and if you change one, it affects the other two. Your phone, again, is taking averages. It is got these amazing sensors, and it is pulling light in. It is pulling in light to see like, where's the shadow, what's this color. But again, it averages that stuff out based on if you've got the latest phone, if they have a good, you know, sensor in there for all of those things. So you can change the shutter speed. The shutter speed, when we looked at that aperture, it's how quick that opens and closes. So if you've got a wide aperture, it's how quick it goes and goes back open, or a small aperture. So what I tend to say to people is, if you can change any of these things on your phone, and we just talked about the f-stop, the aperture, do that first versus trying to pull in a lot of tools if you're not comfortable with the tools yet and you just want to play around with your phone. As you can see, it shows you how things get brighter. So higher ISO gets brighter because that's what you use in less light. Slower shutter speed because it stays open longer, it pulls in more light. But if you do a lower shutter speed, what is going to happen if something is moving?
It gets blurry.
Anybody know? Yes, it gets blurry.
Blurry.
Sometimes you might want blur, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, but sometimes you don't want blur. So a little tripod, like one of those little iPhone or smartphone tripods, is a wonderful tool to have if you've got stuff that's moving, and you want you have a slower shutter speed, and you can really capture that without it, and also if you're holding your phone, we're moving, we're breathing, we might not have the best balance, I tend to, try to balance myself and take a big deep breath like I'm doing an x-ray sometimes if I've got a lower shutter speed and I don't want to get out my tripod, and that gives you a better result. So moving that phone around with a slow shutter speed is going to give you blur. So when you're trying to get something in lower light, by changing your shutter speed, or what they call your exposure in your phone, that is, a tripod is going to help you greatly. An ISO is basically, when we had the old film cameras and we got 400 film versus 800 film versus 200 film, that's what ISO is. It is a way to detect the sensitivity to light for the exposure. So remember, your camera or your smartphone rather, you may not be able to actually change every bit of that in there, but if you change one of those, the camera will adjust the other things, and it might be the sweet spot you need to get that good photo. All right, so where is the light source and where is your subject? We talked a little bit about that when I was talking about the light being behind me versus the light being in front of me. If I've got a light in front of me that will project on me so that when I'm not sharing my screen, you guys can see me. If I had light behind me, I would just look like a shadowy figure because the light would be basically making me a shadow. But I could do the thing that is on the bottom where it says bend it, reflect it, block it, or diffuse it. A whiteboard or something, a white wall, that will take the light that would be behind me, that's backlighting me, and that light is going to go past me. It's going to hit that whiteboard or that white wall in front of me, and it's going to bounce back at my face and kind of brighten my face a little bit. A lot of times, like if you're using your smartphone or a point and shoot camera, that flash will pop on. That flash popping on is telling you, hey, you don't have enough light to clearly see the thing that's in front of you. There's too much light behind it. A flash is a good option, not always the best option, because a flash has a way of just really, I mean, we've all done the flash where we're like, whoa, that was way too much light. And so often it's better to use the light you have and bend it, reflect it, block it, or diffuse it. When you diffuse it, basically that would be like you have a really sunny window and that sun is just streaming in and you're like, wow, this is great light, but it's too much. I don't want the sun to basically be like a light swath across my frame. You could put several things in front of that light, that window. Sheer curtains. You could do like I always tell people in the kitchen, wax paper works really well. Vellum, just something that is going to be between the light rays, and they're going to hit that, and they're going to like diffuse outwards. Reflecting it, we talked about it. Bending it is like if you had like a piece of white poster board and you were trying to like bend the light so you could get light on more sides of an object. Reflecting it, we talked about. Blocking it, maybe you have too much light. Maybe it's just like, wow, there is way too much light. We have light overhead and we need to block some of that. You can use a foam board. You can use something that is black, like a black foam board or a black tablecloth, to block out light. So natural light is always going to be the one you want to use to your advantage, but it's not always possible. If you can take photos outdoors, that is like ideal, but also not out in the blazing sun, like finding a place that's either shaded or where you've got maybe some light that's bouncing off. You know, the side of my house, I can grow plants on it because my neighbor's house is a very like bright white color, and that sun hits their house and bounces back at my windows. So it makes a wonderful bright window to grow plants in. So it's that same idea. Like that would be the window that if I wanted to go and take a selfie, I would go to that window. I would face that reflected light there and it would light me up very nicely. Adding more light, LED lights. And when we talk about equipment, I'll give you some resources as far as like where to find LED lights and what kind of LED lights work. In a pinch, if you have somebody else with you and they can turn on the flashlight on their smartphone, it's not a ton of light, but it can fill in where light is absent, or it can give you kind of a spotlight effect. But again, thinking about where is your light versus how are you photographing? If somebody's holding the light above, you can't go under that light and take a photo, or it will do that dreaded shadow of your phone on the thing you're trying to take photos of. So often you need light to be one side or the other side or both sides, and then you're above the light taking a photo of it. So what if you cannot add more light? Well, there are some wonderful editing apps that will allow you to increase the exposure or the brightness or the highlights. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Any other questions about light before I move on? Okay. And part of this is just playing around with where do I have good light? Where do I not? You know, how do I, you know, if you go to take a photo and you're like, wow, what I'm trying to take a photo of is really dark, then think about, oh, well, maybe the light is behind you. So you need to turn, you know, you and the subject to be facing the light, or maybe you have the light come from the side or something like that. So the rule of thirds is about composition, about how you are using the frame that is the photo. The rule of thirds says that 1/3 of the frame is filled with one thing and 2/3 of the frame is filled with another thing. That thing could be light versus dark, subject versus no subject, color accents or themes that are, you know, opposing or contrasting or complementary, focus versus out of focus, like when we talked about aperture. And it can be vertical, horizontal, diagonal, or abstract through that frame. Abstract is more difficult sometimes to pick up. The best version of this is that sunset photo at the beach. The rule of thirds says don't put that horizon dead center of your frame. Either have more sand and water and less sky, or more sky and less sand and water. And it's something about how our eye, we like that kind of that oddity of the rule of thirds. And you can see that a lot also in the way things are merchandised in stores. A lot of, you know, triangular things that are using the rule of three. You know, there might be one of something and then three other things are different. You know, there might be, you know, things that are, you know, every other one where there's two and there's three. So that kind of, it's that oddity that our eye likes. There's a whole psychology behind that, but it definitely works to make people stop on a photo, which is the whole goal of what we're trying to do here. We want them to see your photo on your website, in social media, in your marketing materials and go, wait, what's that? Oh, I want to know more about this. And then, you know, engage with that. So here are some rule of thirds. And some of them are abstract and some of them are very, you know, very obvious. So in the photo of the beautiful trees that have the Spanish moss in them and the little pond, this was something that I took down in Florida for a landscaping business. Does anybody want to tell me what the rule of thirds might perhaps be in that photo? And remember, it can be abstract.
The pond is the first third, and then everything beyond that in the trailer is like the second 2/3.
Exactly. There's also another one. Anybody want to venture a guess? And often when you start to look at and deconstruct the rule of thirds, a lot of photos use more than one rule of thirds to make a good photo.
Yeah, so I would say the trees on the left is a third, and then the rest.
Exactly. There is also an abstract through there. So if you look at this photo as in totality, okay, You have the water, you have the, which is a hue of green. You have hues of green in the leaves. You have hues of green in the foreground and the grass. So there's two abstracts. One is your brown or neutral toned hues versus your green hues. Your brown or neutral toned, and we're including the trailer in the back, is about 1/3 of that photo, and everything else is shades of green. Do you guys see that? The other abstract is, let's look at natural world versus man-made world. You have a car, you have the truck and the trailer, and a little bit, you can kind of make it out in front of the car of the house there. And everything else is natural world. And that's what draws your eye to that trailer, because it kind of sticks out in that natural world, doesn't it? We've also used an aperture that shows that I'm looking through the photo. So I used an aperture that dials in on that trailer because that's the brand. It gives you an idea of where you might see that trailer because it's a landscaping business. But my foreground is not as in sharp of focus as the trailer with the logo. So do you guys see why that photo kind of works? So let's go to the photo next to it, the lovely portrait of the young lady at NC State. What would be the rule of thirds in this photo?
Her position to like the left side of the frame.
Absolutely. So she's taking up, and the column behind her kind of included in that, 1/3 of that overall landscape frame. You could also say that she is the only human in that whole frame. So it's, you know, subject versus not the subject. So that's another way to look at the rule of thirds in that frame. Again, also, when we talk about aperture, I'm dialing in right on her. She's in the foreground. She's closest to me. And as you look back through that photo, everything gets a little bit more out of focus, but it gives you an idea of where she is. You can see wolf pack. You can see the color scheme. You know, obviously she's in some kind of gathering area. So it kind of gives you that idea. Also, those lights in that room are not a professional photographer's dream. They are a fluorescent. You can see how incredibly warm they are in the background, but she's lit up and she is definitely color balanced because I used a light on her that was, you know, going to kind of set her apart from the background. Let's go to the photo of the gentleman putting the stamp on the bottom of the porcelain plate. Anybody want to venture a guess of the rule of thirds in that one? And portrait oriented often can be a little bit more difficult because, again, when we've got all of that space across the horizontal nature of a photo, it's often easier to play around with the rule of thirds. Anybody want to guess on the one with the gentleman in it?
Well, I think it's just subject and not subject.
Yes. And you notice how it's almost like you could draw a diagonal through that frame. You've got him, and again, it's not exactly 1/3 and 2/3. It's a rough estimate, and you can kind of see that. Had I moved him more into the frame, it would have been off a little bit. And it was just the way I framed it, the way I kind of twisted. And again, this is another one of those look through photos where you can see the edge of the wall there. And it's kind of like I'm peeking around the wall and catching this moment of him doing something that is integral to the process of this porcelain company. You could also,
I was going to say, it
go
also
ahead.
has a nice color. The blue is like 1/3, and then the white is like the 2/3.
Absolutely. That's the abstract. Very good. And that, you know, like, again, this is about just understanding these things so you can kind of intentionally look at a photo and be like, oh, why do I like this photo? Oh, look, they use the rule of thirds, or they use this, or, you know, like it is also going to change the way you look at other people's photos. But I think then that informs the way that you will also be able to photograph for your own business. So yes, the blue, that popping bright blue versus everything else is kind of very muted tones. And so the blue is about a third of the photo, and then everything else kind of has a very muted tone to it. So what about the grape leaves there? Anybody want to venture a guess about the grape leaf photo?
I'm sorry, would you repeat the question again?
Yes, anybody want to venture a guess about the grape leaf photo, about where the rule of thirds is in this? And there's a couple of them, so don't be shy.
Well, I'm going to take a guess on the abstract because it seems like there's a third of brown with the, the stem of the vine.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
There's more green than brown in this photo. And definitely, you think of color palette and you think of like brown being kind of more in the darker tones, and the blue sky and the green of the vines and the green of the grass underneath it are all in a different color family. And so, and they're not neutral. So you think of, 1/3 of it being that vine and that neutral color, and then the rest of it being more of that bright, almost like in the jewel tones. Perfect. What's another way? There's a couple others.
The vine itself coming in at the front of the frame.
Yes, I'm using aperture to do my rule of thirds. So that's super, like, you can absolutely do that. You can use kind of, the mechanism within whatever you're taking the photo with and how you frame it. If you were using an iPhone, you could just say, oh, instead of taking this any other way, I'm going to take it in portrait mode, and I'm going to play with my aperture to make sure I get that whole front leaf and vine in focus. And then I'm going to let everything else be blurred. And then, you've got basically the rule of thirds, and you've got an interesting photo. It's like, ooh, what is that? The other way is the way that I have cut the horizon and done this at an angle. If you include the entire front vine and then the horizon down through the bottom of the photo, all of that is about 2/3, and the sky, that blue brighter color, is about 1/3 on average through the photo. So that is another way to use the rule of thirds in there. So what about our last photo here, the photo of this grapefruit Campari sorbet that I made? I put it right in the middle of that frame. So what do you guys think about how that works?
The pop of color.
Yes. So my background and my and what I have set it on, the little plate, the little platter that I've set it on, even part of the spoon, the reflection of those things through the glass stem, those are all very dark. And then you've got that pop of color. And when we talk about that, it is literally the sorbet itself, the brightness of the peel, that little bit of light on the front of that gold spoon. All of those things kind of add up to be a third in this kind of sea of 2/3 of like grays and blacks and kind of blue hues. So you can still do something in the middle of your frame and make it work with the rule of thirds by being a little bit abstract. So does that make sense to everyone? Does that feel like, okay, I'm getting this. I understand kind of how the rule of thirds can be used to make an interesting photo, but also like how to identify it. So now we're going to talk a little bit about leading lines. Okay, so leading lines are using a natural or man-made line to bring the focus to a certain element of the photo, or to have your eye move through the photo in a specific way. It's a compositional technique to lead your viewer's eye to the heart or the intent of the photo. And when you see these examples, you'll probably have that aha moment of like, oh, yes, I see this all the time. But we're going to talk a little bit about how to do that kind of based on what we're seeing in these examples. So leading lines, the example with the artwork in it, that's super easy. It gives this idea that, this child's artwork at this wonderful little studio in Raleigh is like front and center, but then you get the idea that, oh, there's other artwork. Like this is a whole little drying rack thing for beautiful artwork that children have made. But I'm also using that to move your eye through the photo so that you can actually, we can communicate that. So hopefully you all understand that aspect of like, you see that you're like, oh, this is a piece of artwork, perhaps a child's artwork. And then you kind of look through it and you see like, oh, that's like a painted cardboard tube or something. And then there's other things. And, you know, you're developing that whole thing about what is this photo communicating to me? And then you would perhaps then read about this art studio where you could sign your child up for art classes. So it's all about like that photo that grabs the attention. I'm also using the rule of thirds by the way I framed it with the rod through there where there is subject and no subject. I'm using the rule of thirds by the way that color versus no color in this, because it's a very, bright photo. So you're often using several of these compositional techniques together to really get the wow factor. So the photo next to that of the lovely young lady at NC State, I do a lot of leading lines in portraits that I take or headshots per se. And I think that that's really good to kind of like set the stage. You know, she's in this building and it kind of gives a sense of, the outdoors behind her, but also this really kind of modern building. You're focused in on her because the color palette behind her makes your eye go to her because she's got on some, bright colors and some dark colors, which makes your eye go straight to her. I've also offset her a little bit in the frame so that your eye just goes right to her and then kind of continues on through the photo. So this is how using leading lines can really kind of give you that wow factor. The one down on the bottom corner where the young lady is in the pool, I've just used the pool the way I frame it. Using architectural things is kind of really easy to do when you're in a space, but you can use nature as well. Like the grapevine that we just talked about, that was a leading line photo because it makes your eye go to that thing that's in the foreground, which is that grapevine. And you're like, oh, that's a grape leaf. This is a grapevine. And then you can see the rest of the vine kind of go back through that photo. So these are techniques that you're going to be wanting to use in whatever you're taking photos of. And it does not have to be photos just like this of architectural things. It could be nature. It could be the space that you produce in. It could be very industrial, or it could be very, it could be a boutique. It could be the way you have, clothes or something hanging along the wall, and you shoot that photo of like the wall of clothing. Does that make sense to everyone? Is there any question about the leading lines? So one of the things that I was going to say, is it Maggie that had the question about giving away the trees?
Yes, I did.
So do you see how you might be able to use some of these techniques in taking those photos? And specifically, I was thinking like, when you have the trees that you're giving away. So what I'm imagining when you're saying that is there's something to keep that root ball, moist. And then there's that stick that's sticking out of it, correct? Kind of in the winter.
You know a bit about trees, don't you?
I do. I'm an avid gardener and I live up by the Eno River. So I've got a ton of amazing trees around me. So here's what I'm envisioning with that, just to kind of give you some ideas.
Let me just say they're actually bare root. So
okay.
So it's even worse because they're bare root.
Okay, no, actually that I can work with that. I could totally work with that. Okay, so you've got bare root trees, okay?
Mm-hmm.
If you put that in someone's hands, so say I cupped my hands and brought my hands towards you and laid that would be an amazing image.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to focus in on that. Maybe you're going to have those hands over, a forest floor or over a green lawn, because then you're going to have that contrast of the hands, which are, a neutral kind of, tone, skin tone, if you will, whatever skin tone that is. And then you're going to have that beautiful tree, but you're also going to evoke a little emotion there about like the care and the tenderness of that tree. So think about those moments, as well as getting, the event moments. Maybe there's a child that's carrying one. a baby tree and a young human. Like there's a lot that can be said about that, about,
Mhm.
nature and climate and ecology. But what if you've got like a bunch of those laid out, perhaps on a table? You
Mhm.
could use a leading line to go across that table of those, kind of
Mhm.
in a diagonal through the photo, with maybe hands reaching for one or someone picking one up and handing it to someone.
Mhm.
So those are ways to get interest and to create interest in a photo. So are
Okay.
those some good ideas? Could you use those, you think?
Definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
That sounds great. And so, I mean, typically I'm using an iPhone, or, volunteers would be taking pictures also with their phones, whether they're iPhone or Android.
Sure.
And so, so those pictures, like the one handing, what mode would be best?
So I think in that aspect, you would want to make sure that, like, if you're doing a leading line, it's okay to get the whole thing and have the whole thing be kind of in focus.
Mhm.
But it's about where is the position in that frame. And you're probably
Mhm.
going to want to shoot it horizontally or landscape. Where
Mhm.
is the position of the hand being, given? Is it in the foreground, or is it maybe off in the corner and you're seeing all these trees and wow, that last one is being handed to someone?
Mhm.
So again, it evokes emotion, it makes interest, it moves the eye through the photo. And you can play around with that. Have somebody shoot it where it's in the foreground, it's closer to you, and then have somebody shoot it, and you can say, okay, can you hold it there? Oh, let me grab a real quick photo and move that, frame around. And you'll know when you've kind of hit the sweet spot of like, wow, that looks really good.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I guess maybe I need to just do these kinds of images when I'm giving away trees when they still have their leaves on them. Because when they're just a stick, the sticks just get lost completely.
Yes. And the stick might be cooler in somebody's hand or on a background where it really sticks out and it's maybe
Yeah.
one of them, or maybe a group of three of them,
Right.
where you could have somebody be like, what is that they have in their hand? Like you are drawing attention to it.
Mhm. Mhm.
And you could do that very easily going in a place where you've got bright sun, but you've got a little bit of shade,
Mhm.
you've got a background that's neutral behind those hands, and then placing those in some cupped hands,
Right.
or even having somebody hold one up like against the sky where you
Mhm.
see it standing up, and you have their hand, part of their forearm and their hand coming from,
Mhm.
outside the frame. So you're using their arm as the leading line.
Right. That would be cool. That's an interesting one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've done that with like strawberries, where somebody held up a strawberry, and then there was like the strawberry field kind of low in the frame, and then the blue sky with the clouds and stuff, and it really drew, like your eye just went down that arm right to that strawberry, but it gave it a sense of place.
Mhm. Okay. Thank you so much.
Yes, you're welcome. Any other questions or any other like challenges that I can help anybody with, as far as, this is I would love to do this, but I don't know how to do this. And again, if it happens later, hopefully you've got my contact information, or you can find me, and I'm happy to answer questions. I love challenges because I feel like there's a way to do just about everything. Okay, we will move on then to creating interest. And we've kind of talked about that already, because you're doing that by making sure you're following some of those rules of thirds and, leading lines. But this is kind of going even further. So capturing motion, whether it's blurred or stop action. Blurred is the best description of that I can kind of give you, and I'll show you some examples. But like, as we're talking about it, the waterfall. So you are at a beautiful waterfall in Western North Carolina, and you want to take a picture of it. Do you use a slow shutter speed and you blur the waterfall, making sure that you keep your camera very steady, or your phone very steady, so that everything else is in full, nice, sharp, focus, and then that water is blurred because it's moving? Or you know, is if it's a raging waterfall and you want to get those drops of water that are coming off of the rocks below and stop those in motion, then you're going to use a quicker shutter speed. Because you're outside, generally you're not going to have to adjust too much exposure, but you know, again, how sunny is it and where is the sun? But like those are ideas as far as like, we've all looked at that waterfall photo, whether it was blurred or stopped action, and we know what's happening there. It's interesting because we know there's movement that was stopped, or we see the movement that was blurred, and we can almost hear that photo. You can use frames to create a video or a GIF. So here's the cool thing. If you have a tripod and you are taking an image and you're not moving your camera, but you're moving what's happening, or you're taking a video, you can create a video from stills, like a stop motion animation, or you can take a video and create a GIF. So think about those things. I'll show you an example of that in just a minute, but that goes into a whole realm where, you know, like there is, the sky's the limit. And as we talk about Reels in Instagram, you can use images to make a video in Reels, or you can use a video in Reels. So if you've got images, create a video from those images. It will still get as much attention as a video. Textures create interest because they move your eye through the photo. So think about, you know, for me, photographing a plate of noodles, you know, noodles, your eye moves through that plate of noodles or that bowl of noodles, and it's wonderful because I don't have to do much except for how I frame it. How you frame it creates movement. We've talked a little bit about that with leading lines, repeating patterns, and adding a human element. Here are some examples of that. At the top, I've got that landscaping company again, and you can see that he's spreading fertilizer, and you can see the fertilizer flying out of that contraption that he's writing, and it's everywhere. I mean, if you were to kind of like zoom in, like even his pants look like they're speckled with white because it's like flying in all directions. So I did a stop motion for that, so that you could see it's like little pellets of fertilizer, you know, they take care of your lawn kind of idea. And then of course I framed him. I used the leading lines of the siding on the side of the building. So you can kind of see what all I'm doing there, right? And I'm creating interest and I'm creating movement. The one next to that goes back to my food world, and that is Chocolate Confections. That is their chocolatier Matthew filling these trays with beautiful chocolate. I mean, don't we all just want to like dip our fingers in that bowl? And you know, you can get a sense for what's going on there. You know, we're focused in on the drips and the spills. It doesn't need to be beautiful. Like there's the spatula there, there's the drizzle down the side. Like sometimes making and creating a product that you're selling isn't a pretty process, but it does have its own beauty a lot of times when we show the motion of that. Down on the corner there, we have a gentleman that has just dipped one of those beautiful porcelain bowls that Hand in Burlington does into a glaze, and you can see the glaze dripping off of it. You can kind of see, you know, that I've got a stop motion going on there, but there's just a little bit of blur with the glaze, but you can see the perfect little drips. Again, the way I have framed this photo is that, you know, he takes up about 2/3 of it, and then the negative space behind him is about 1/3 of the photo. And then we've got some blur action going on down here in the bottom photo at Red's Green Acre. He is actually harvesting pea shoots, and he uses this wonderful little contraption with like a drill motor on it, and it's these little basically like rope things, and that just pulls off the little pea shoots so that it doesn't damage them. But we wanted to get that in motion, so you can see that there's like a whirring of sorts going on there, and that drives interest to like, what is going on in this photo? I want to know more about this. I want to read about it. Ooh, I want some pea shoots. Where can I find these pea shoots? Let me go to his website. It's that whole trajectory of getting someone to engage with your brand. Here is the stop motion that I did for Mezcalito, which is a Mexican restaurant, just opened a location here in Durham, but they're all over the triangle. And basically what I did is I had my camera on a tripod, and we just had him squeeze, and I just took a bunch of photos in a really quick succession. And then we just play them on a loop. So that's a fun little thing to do. There's many ways to do that, but just a fun little thing to do. So equipment. If lighting is an issue, LED lighting is a great investment. Best Buy, Amazon, any of the camera stores, Adorama, B&H, and there's 2 really good used camera equipment places that I want you to know about. One of them is MBP. They sell used equipment, and the other one is KE as in Echo, H as in house. And those 2 companies, they buy and sell used camera and photography and video equipment, and they're really good to know for, you know, business owners who do not want to drop a huge amount of your budget on that. A little tripod for your longer exposure and sharper images is really good to have. You could do a tabletop one. You just need something that has, you know, a way to hold a phone for you. There's a ton of them out there. You can just put in tripods for smartphones and you'll probably be a little overwhelmed by what's out there, but all of them are good. Foam boards, you can have white, black. You can cover one side in an aluminum foil, which is a wonderful reflecting material that can give you even more reflection. Editing apps, like I said before, you want to find one that you like and stick with it. If you need suggestions, please reach out to me. I can give you a couple of good ones for specifically what you're looking for. And then photo storage is always an issue for photographers and also for business owners. I do love Google Drive, Dropbox, iCloud, and PixieSet. And then, you know, if you have other people in your business taking photos, you can have them upload to those places so that you are not the sole person in charge of taking every photo. And then that way you can kind of, you know, organize them there. Maybe you have a process and you're like, all my process photos go here, all my staff photos go here, you know, and then you can have a way to grab things really quick to make your social media strategy.
Stacey,
Or to share with, yes.
On the photo storage, you know, I have a hard time figuring out, like on my phone, getting the iPhone photos to go into a Google Drive. Isn't there a way to do that? But I just struggle with that a lot.
There is a way to do that. Basically, when you have your Google Drive, so I'm gonna try to do it here while I'm talking to you. Okay, so you have your Google Drive and you go into a file. And hold on here just a second. And you go down to the little plus that's like, so I would make a folder first, and then, because sometimes it doesn't love it when you just upload it into there. So make a folder that says photos and then go into that folder. And when you click on that folder and it shows you what's in that folder, there's a little plus down on the right-hand corner of the screen, and it's like a rainbow colored plus. If you hit that plus, you get create new folder, upload, use camera, and then you've got Google Docs, Google Sheets, and Google Slides. If you hit use camera, you can take a photo that will automatically go in there. And if you hit upload, you can go to your photos and videos on your camera and upload from there. Does that make sense to you and to anyone else who had that question? So it's that plus down there in the corner when you open Google Drive on your phone.
Right. Yes. Thank you so much. Wow, that's so easy.
Yeah, I mean, it's intuitive, but it's not intuitive if you're like, what is, you know, I don't, it's
if you
not,
don't know where
it
to
doesn't
start.
just tell you. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The other thing I will say is if you guys have photos from professional photographers that you want to put in Instagram or you want to put on social media or be able to use from your phone, Google Drive and Dropbox are 2 wonderful ways to do that. That is the only way because you need to get that professional photo on your phone. You also want to make sure that anything that you're posting is 2 megabytes or less so that it doesn't get pixelated when it gets compressed. That's a whole nother thing that we would not have time to talk about, but definitely like you want to stay within the like less than 2 megabyte range for photos that you're putting on the web or on social media. Keeps the image sharper because it won't compress it. All right. So we're going to move on to editing. And this is a kind of just a short little piece before we end here. Editing is your way to put your creative flair on your photos. And I'm hard pressed to say that like there is nothing that I would ever post as a professional photographer from my phone or from my camera straight out of those things without doing something to it. And let me tell you, a lot of people have asked me like, well, isn't that cheating? It's not cheating, because if I was only a film photographer, I would not hand you as a business owner that canister of film when I got done and be like, here you go, and just walk out the door and be like, I'll send you an invoice. I would develop those images for you. And so, or I would work with the lab that's going to develop those photo images for you. So basically with digital photography, our editing is basically our ability to develop those, and then we have more tools to do fun things with them, even more tools than you would if it was film. So it's not cheating, it's absolutely necessary, because when you take a photo of something and you go, wow, that's not what I'm seeing, well, it's because your eye is really the most sensitive and the most advanced sensor that exists. And so we're trying to get as close to what we're seeing, and we got to do a few things to do that. So let me talk a little bit about that before we close. So start with a good photograph, and we've just talked about that, right? So we're going to make it a good photograph, but then like good bone structure, but then we're going to add some things to it to make it great, to make it pop, to make people go, wow. So we're going to color correct it if we didn't have good light. Okay. So we're going to make sure that, usually that's temperature in your editing apps. The temperature is, if you go to the right, it's going to be cooler. And if you go to the backwards. If you go to the left, it's going to be cooler. And if you go to the right, it's going to be warmer, or however that app has it. So that's what you're going to do as far as color correcting. You find something that you know what color it is in that frame, and you say, oh, that's not the color that's supposed to be. That white looks too cream. Well, then you've got a warmer light that it was taken in. So you're just going to back off that little. And again, light touch on all of these, you're just adding a little bit of pizzazz. Often you're going to clarify, you're going to brighten. Dodging and burning. Dodging is taking an area of a photo and making it brighter or exposing it more. Usually that's like a painting tool with your finger on an iPhone. Burning is the opposite of that. You want to darken an area, and it's usually a spot. Vibrance and saturate is because light washes out color, but you need light to take photos. When I do portraits of people, I always say, put on way more lipstick than you ever wear, put on much more makeup than you ever wear, because this flash photography is going to completely wash you out. And I know people are uncomfortable with that, but then they see the photo and they're like, oh, wow, yeah, it looks like I normally look. And I'm like, yes, exactly. Same thing with anything we take photos of. We need to add a little vibrance, and we need to add a little saturation often. Again, very gentle touch on all of those. Filters can help you have a brand aesthetic. So like when you look through what we call the quilt on Instagram, which is your first 9 photos, you can often see, wow, this brand has like bright colors, or they have a certain color palette, or wow, this brand, like when we looked at that AC hotel photo montage earlier, they're very muted. It's very cool kind of temperature. This is where you can kind of really go with what your brand is meant to communicate. And then finding the editing software or app or program that works best for you and learning it inside and out. This right here is the best example I can give you for why you need to edit your smartphone photos. So a little history on this image. I was working for a marketing and PR agency, and one of the wait staff at one of the restaurants that they work for sent them this photo of the nightly special. And they were like, can you get a better photo? And she was like, well, this is directly under the lights that you told me to take it on. And, she didn't know how to take a really good photo, except for the fact that she's got it in focus and it's framed well. So they, in a panic, said, I'm going to send you this. Is there anything you can do with it? And so I imported that image and I said, send me the highest resolution of that image you can, the biggest file. And I imported it to my computer and I went into PicMonkey, which is one of my favorite mobile and desktop editing apps. They used to have a trial free version. I do believe they still have that. I do pay an annual amount, but that they give you tutorials, and truly it is almost like Photoshop. It's so good. So I went in there and I was able to take that photo and turn it into the one that you see that is a depiction of what that woman was seeing when she took that photo. Any thoughts on this?
Way more
I guess I would,
advertising.
yeah, I guess I would say like it's the difference between maybe saving some good photos you've taken already and having to retake those photos, or it's the difference between having, you know, other employees with maybe lesser phones, or you know, them being in the moment and you not, but you can still give the audience, the followers, potential customers, a really good image. So this is the image that I think kind of sells that out, that aspect. And what I did to this was I obviously color corrected it. I saturated, I did some spot removal of some things that were, you know, distractions. And then I just clarified it and contrasted it a little to make it pop. And I didn't do a lot, honestly. The other thing that you can do through editing is using graphics and photos to create a composite. This is an example of the few things that I've done for clients. This is easy to do within PicMonkey, Canva, Photoshop. There are tons of other ones that you can do. You can actually do some of this right on your phone. PicMonkey has an option to do it on your phone when their mobile app. So again, it's finding something that works for you, for your brand and your business. And the photo that is all of the chocolates with chocolate confections, that's a wonderful way to take a fun photo and then brand it for you. The same thing with Mobility Body Works. This is a masseuse that I have been seeing for darn near 8 years, and she's wonderful. And she comes to me, and she does really great group events. And she was like, "Could you come and take photos of us in this gymnasium?" And I said, yes. And of course, it's a gymnasium. It's not an exciting space, but then putting her logo on there kind of tells you, oh, she's going to places. This isn't her place. You know, another way to communicate things through using those graphics and photos. So there's a lot to be said with also how you set up those photos so that you can use graphics. And I will leave you with this. The return on your investment of taking some time to learn this new skill and hone it is absolutely equivalent to the rate of involvement with your brand via social media and your website and marketing materials. I've seen it time and time again, and I want business owners, especially small business owners, to be successful. And I do think that this is an aspect of your business that will give you an amount of success absolutely equivalent to how much time and energy you are able to put into it yourself or have other people within your business do. So I will leave you guys with that. And if we have time, if there's any final questions, I'd be happy to answer those quickly, or I want to also be very respectful of your time frames.
I have a quick question. I do a lot of stickers and magnets that I take photos of. Do you suggest putting them in some kind of light box or creating a inexpensive light box?
Yes, your foam board or your tri-fold foam boards that kids get for their little presentations at Staples are going to be your best friend when it comes to that. Or you can make a soft box out of, like a frame and white material that's non-reflective. But I think for, quick and easy and getting it done, sooner rather than later, foam board, you can create one with foam board very easily.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. And I'm gonna see if I can stop sharing my screen here.
Do we have any other questions before we let Stacy go?
Stacy, what was the editing app you mentioned? I forgot.
It's PicMonkey, and I can actually, here, I'll put that in the chat real quick here. So it's PicMonkey is a good one. The places for used equipment are MVP and KEH.
Are they local or is that online?
It's online. You can also check if you're looking to do local. Southeastern Camera may have, they at one time did used gear for rent and for sale. So if they're still doing that, that might be a good option.
Awesome.
Any other questions or anything that I can put in the chat box for you guys?
Well, we'll be sure to post this along with your contact information on our blog and include it in some newsletters as well if there is any follow-up questions so that people know where to
Sure.
reach out. But this has been awesome. I've
Absolutely.
learned a lot, so I've got a lot of tips to work with.
Good, good. Well, I think there's great value in it. And so, I just want to share as much information as I can so that people can use it and it can be a game changer. I love that.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for spending your morning with us and to everybody else who came out as well. So I hope everybody found some value in this. I know that I took away a lot from it. So thank you, Stacy. I really appreciate you sharing all your knowledge with us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. This was fun.
Good. Well, we'll see you again soon, I hope.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Stacy. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
It's crazy. There's like